The room was silent except for the sound of her own ragged breathing. Blood pounded in her ears as Carol stared at the man standing before her, his eyes a mixture of desperation and fire. "If you walk away now, Carol," he said, his voice trembling, "you'll never know the truth. And I swear, it's not what you think." Carol didn't know what was more terrifying, the lie she had uncovered or the terrifying pull she still felt toward the man she had once loved with every piece of her broken soul. Carol Egonga thrived on control. As a journalist who had made a name for herself exposing scandals and corruption, she relished unraveling others' lives, laying them bare for the world to see. But her own life? That was a fortress she guarded fiercely. Every choice, every move she made, was calculated to avoid the chaos she had grown up with. Chaos had a name, and it was Egonga Mwololo. It had been 6 years since she'd last seen him. 6 years since she'd walked away from the man who had been both her greatest love and her greatest mistake. Their relationship had been a wildfire, beautiful and destructive, consuming everything in its path. Carol had barely escaped the flames with her sanity intact. But chaos doesn't stay buried forever. The call came on a rainy Monday morning, an anonymous tip promising the story of the year. A powerful politician was allegedly involved in a web of corruption, and the caller claimed to have evidence. It wasn't unusual for Carol to get such tips, but something about this one felt different. The voice on the other end had been shaky, urgent, as if they were afraid of being overheard. "Come to the Harrowgate gala tonight," the caller had whispered. "You'll find what you're looking for there." Carol wasn't one to chase ghosts, but the promise of a career-defining story was too tempting to ignore. The Harrowgate Gala was a charity event attended by the city's elite, a glittering parade of power and privilege. It was the perfect setting for a scandal to unravel. She arrived at the gala dressed in a sleek black gown, her journalist's instincts on high alert. The room was a sea of diamonds and designer suits, laughter and champagne flowing freely. Carol's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for her contact. And then she saw him. Egonga Mwololo. Her breath caught in her throat. He stood near the grand piano, a glass of whiskey in hand, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. Time had been kind to him, accentuating the sharp angles of his face, the magnetic confidence that had once drawn her in like a moth to a flame. His eyes met hers across the room, and for a moment, the noise around them faded. The air seemed to crackle, charged with the electricity of their shared history. Carol's heart pounded, a mix of anger, longing, and something she couldn't quite name. Before she could decide whether to approach him or bolt in the opposite direction, Egonga moved toward her, his stride purposeful and unhurried. When he stopped in front of her, his voice was low and familiar, sending a shiver down her spine. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said, his dark eyes searching hers. "Neither did I," Carol replied, her voice cool, masking the storm inside her. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their past hanging between them. Carol's mind raced with questions. What was he doing here? Did he know about the tip she'd received? And why, after all these years, did he still have this effect on her? But before she could speak, a man approached them, interrupting the moment. Carol recognized him as the politician at the center of the scandal she was investigating. He greeted Egonga warmly, clapping him on the shoulder. Carol's stomach dropped. The pieces began to click into place, and a sickening realization hit her. The anonymous tip wasn't about the politician. It was about Egonga. Carol didn't let Egonga see her panic. She plastered on a polite smile and excused herself, weaving through the crowd until she reached the terrace. The cool night air did little to calm the storm raging inside her. Egonga was tied to the scandal. Of course he was. Trouble had always followed him like a shadow, and she had been foolish to think he could change. Yet here he was, more polished, more dangerous than ever. Running away again? Carol spun around to find Egonga standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, a small smirk playing on his lips. She hated how effortlessly he could unsettle her. "What do you want, Egonga?" she snapped. "Why are you here?" He stepped closer, his smirk fading. I could ask you the same thing. But I think we both know the answer. Carol crossed her arms, her defenses rising. If you're involved in this, I will find out. And I will expose you. Egonga's expression hardened. You think this is a game, Carol? You have no idea what you're walking into. Then enlighten me, she challenged, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. He hesitated, and for a moment, she saw something in his eyes that looked like fear. But then it was gone, replaced by the same inscrutable mask he always wore. Meet me tomorrow, he said, his tone softer now. I'll explain everything. But not here. Carol wanted to refuse, to walk away and leave him in her past where he belonged. But the journalist in her couldn't resist the lure of the truth. And the part of her that still remembered the man she had loved couldn't ignore the crack in his armor. Fine, she said, her voice clipped. But if you lie to me, Egonga, I'll make sure you regret it. He nodded, a shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Carol. The next day, they met in a dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of the city. Egonga looked out of place in the modest setting, his expensive suit and commanding presence drawing glances from other patrons. Carol sat across from him, her notebook open, ready to document whatever he had to say. Talk, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Egonga leaned forward, his voice low. The politician you're investigating, Raymond Hallstrom, is part of something much bigger. He's laundering money for a syndicate that's been operating under the radar for years. And you're part of it, Carol said, her pen poised to write. Not by choice, Egonga replied, his jaw tightening. They brought me in to clean up their messes. I'm a fixer, Carol, not a criminal. But when you're in this deep, there's no way out. Carol raised an eyebrow. Convenient excuse. Why should I believe you? He met her gaze, his eyes intense. Because if I wanted to stop you, I would have. Instead, I'm giving you the truth. Use it. Before Carol could respond, the cafe door swung open, and two men in dark suits walked in, their eyes scanning the room. Egonga tensed, his hand moving instinctively to his jacket pocket. We need to leave, he said, his voice urgent. Now. Carol hesitated, but the look in Egonga's eyes convinced her. Grabbing her notebook, she followed him out the back door, her heart pounding. They slipped into an alley, Egonga's hand on her arm as he led her away from danger. This is what I've been dealing with, he said, his voice grim. They don't just play dirty. They play to win. As the tension crackled between them, Egonga's grip on her arm lingered. Carol's heart raced, not just from the adrenaline, but from the way his presence filled the space around her. She pulled away, clearing her throat. Don't think for a second this changes anything, she said, her voice steady but her resolve wavering. Egonga's lips curved into a faint smile, his gaze piercing. You always were stubborn. But we're not done here, Carol. Not by a long shot. They heard footsteps approaching from the alley's entrance. Egonga's hand brushed hers as he whispered, "Trust me this once." Before she could respond, he pulled her into the shadows, his body close to hers, their faces inches apart. Her breath caught as his hand lingered on her waist. "Carol," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "I never stopped." She silenced him with a kiss, one charged with years of unresolved emotions. It was brief, but it left them both breathless. Pulling away, Carol met his gaze, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "This doesn't mean I trust you." Egonga smirked, a mix of challenge and promise in his eyes. "Good. Keep me on my toes." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and Egonga pulled her further into the shadows. "There's a way to bring them down, but it's risky. If you're in, there's no turning back." Carol nodded, her pulse racing. "I'm in. But you better not make me regret it." Egonga's expression darkened, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "We'll see who regrets what by the end of this, Carol." Enjoyed the story? Like, subscribe, and join Echoes of Africa for more heart-stopping tales filled with suspense, mystery, and untold truths. Watch out for part 2.